So you're familiar with Romans 1, Ozzy?
Yeah, I am. Yeah, I've actually read the Bible.
Okay, good. Has the Christian God created a set of circumstances?
I wonder if I could make the point that I interjected with.
Yeah, go ahead, Ozzy. I apologize. Go ahead.
Thanks. You can posit a God that's as powerful as you like, any God. It can be the Christian God or another God. It doesn't matter. If you posit a God that has the ability to by virtue of its omnipotence, to persuade anybody, that being could presumably persuade you of anything. So God could just monkey with your brain and make you believe anything, including a falsehood. So the question is not whether God could persuade you of something, but whether he could rationally persuade you by means of providing evidence. And
yes, correct.
On the table is, what could such evidence be? You can posit God could give you evidence, but wait a minute, what's at issue is whether or not there would be evidence of the existence of this God and its omnipotence, absent some understanding of what constitutes evidence. And what Jack has been doing is saying, listen, the concept of evidence is crucially tied to the concept of falsification. If a proposition is put forward that is unfalsifiable, then we can't state what the conditions of verification are for it, and we can't state what the conditions of falsification are for it. These two go hand in hand.
Okay, Ozzy, but you're just talking about the
I'm just going to finish the point.
Okay.
If you cannot specify what the conditions of falsification are for your proposition, how are you going to specify what the conditions of verification are?
Okay. So where I agree with you is you're simply talking about the apprehension of evidence. Now the bottom line is this.
What constitutes evidence?
I'm not talking about any God. I'm not even talking about any God that has certain attributes. I'm talking about as the Christian God is defined and described. Now in Romans 1, the Christian God is defined and described as having made a set of circumstances by which we know he exists. Now, either you accept or you reject that an omnipotent God, such as the Christian God, can create a set of circumstances by which we can rationally know that he exists.
That's not the question.
Okay, I'm talking to Ozzy. I'm not talking to you.
That's not at all the question. The question that's been put to you for like the last half hour that I've been watching is, how can you have an account of evidence that doesn't crucially incorporate the concept of falsification?
I believe that there can only be
posit the being that you're talking about when you can't even imagine a condition that would falsify the very possibility of such a being.
Well, the Christian.
If you think it's necessarily true, then you need an a priori argument.
There are ways of falsifying the Christian God.
I agree, actually. I think there are ways of falsifying the Christian God. I think the Christian God is falsifying that.
Does it say in Romans 1 that the Christian God has created a set of circumstances, namely the creation, by which he can demonstrate through our experience and our visual apprehension that he exists? Does it say that?
It says that's done, but I just don't think that's true. I think that
okay, Ozzy, that's another. Okay, I agree with you there. I'm not asking you that you accept that that's true, because I understand that you're an agnostic, right?
I'm an atheist, actually.
Okay, because I watched you on another video and you said you were an agnostic.
No, Darwin said that he thought that the Christian God would be
so if the Christian, so Ozzy, if the Christian God exists, would Romans 1 be true?
If the Christian God exists, and you assume that the Christian God is accurately represented in the Scriptures, which is another proposition.
That would be included in that assumption.
No, but now hang on. Now what you're doing is you're defining the Christian God as being the author of those passages, and of course that's dubious.
That's included. Yes.
That's dubious. There's something getting lost here.
So Ozzy, if the Christian God exists as he is defined and described in the Old and New Testament, as is traditionally understood by Christian theists, okay, and being that he is omnipotent, can he provide circumstances?
There's no definition of omnipotence provided in the Bible. So even the claim that God is omnipotent is vacuous. I mean, there's so many definitions of omnipotence on offer.
Ozzy, so you are telling me that the majority of theologians do not, who subscribe to the Bible, do not clearly teach that the Bible teaches God's omnipotence?
They teach that he's omnipotent, but different theologians differ on what the meaning of omnipotence is. I've got an entire video on my channel that discusses various versions of omnipotence.
Okay, but you see, that's another rabbit. That's a whole other subject. But the fact.
No, but your argument rests on God being omnipotent, and you haven't even specified what you mean by omnipotence.
Okay, well, I'm talking about God can do all that's logically possible and accord with his own immutable nature.
Well, that's vacuous.
That's vacuous because his own immutable nature is not defined.
But
it's kind of beside the point, though.
His nature is defined within the Bible. The Bible defines and describes his nature. Now, this is a rabbit trail issue.
This is beside the point. This is beside the point. All you're doing is not answering the question.
God is all powerful. If God is all powerful, as it is referred to in the Bible, setting aside differences to what extent that is, can that God create a set of circumstances by which we can rationally conclude that he exists? Yes or no?
I have no idea, because I have no idea what omnipotence means. I have no idea what this nature is. That's not specified either.
He's able to organize all circumstances that are not logically contradictory.
Addressing the issue. You keep turning you're burden shifting. You keep asking the question: if God is omnipotent, couldn't he do this thing? What's at issue is whether or not the concept that you are embracing here is in fact an empirically verifiable or disconfirmable proposition. You're not specifying.
What's bizarre, Ozzy, is he just said that the Christian God could be falsified. So I'm not understanding any of this. If Christian God could be falsified, excuse me, I wasn't done, Darwin. I wasn't done. Yeah, so if the Christian God could be falsified, I'm not really understanding why Darwin's deity isn't presenting the criteria which would disconfirm the Christian God and showing us how, in fact, the Christian God entails certain predictive expectations that could falsify it, right? Because he went through this whole thing about how the Duhem Quine thesis shows that things can't be falsified, right? In which case we don't understand how there could ever be evidence against anything, right? If it were the case that the Duhem Quine thesis showed that nothing could ever be falsified, I don't understand how there could be evidence against anything, right? And he then went into this whole thing about how the falsification criterion was overthrown in the attacks on logical positivism. But now, all of a sudden, a surprise to everybody, Darwin's deity announces that the Christian God can indeed be falsified. Right? So why are we even having this discussion? Just specify what conditions. I wasn't done.
Okay, well, you've been on the mic quite a long time.
You'll have to wait.
Wrap it up quickly, Stalker.
You'll have to wait one more minute.
Ozzy, what you don't know,
Darwin, you're
look, I don't care about the politics between you two. I don't care about the politics between you two.
You're hogging the mic and wrap it up.
I need another
Wrap it up, phony.
So what we're waiting for is for Darwin's deity to provide for us, the conditions under which the Christian God hypothesis would be falsified, and show us exactly how it is the case, that a given set of observations would be inconsistent with the existence of the Christian God. So go ahead, Darwin.
So Ozzy, your big hang-up here is that
you're not answering Jack's question.
No, I don't answer Jack. Jack is a well-known scholar.
I'm asking the same question.
Okay, good. Well, I don't answer questions that he originates with because he's a well-known stalker of mine.
Oh, wait.
Now,
you're not going to answer the question that I have.
Ozzy, I guess you're not aware of the previous history. Jack,
I don't care about your history with this fellow.
Okay, good. Well,
I don't know either of you. This is my first time speaking
I'll explain
to
it some other time. Ozzy, I'll be glad to explain it to you some other time. Now, you raised the issue that you said you didn't know about how we defined omnipotence. Now,
that entire discussion is a red herring. I simply
it's not a red herring.
What do you think are the conditions of falsification?
Because if we come to an agreement, Ozzy, it's not a red herring at all. If we come to an agreement as to what omnipotence entails, and if it falls within that definition of omnipotence, that the Christian God can create a set of circumstances by which we can rationally conclude that he exists, then by virtue of that omnipotence, we can have evidence for God. Okay,
well, in principle, but a lot.
Okay, good. So your big issue
then. Questions that would have to be answered yes, and I doubt many of those would be answered yes.
Okay, so your big
question here. You just said that the Christian God was falsifiable, and you've been asked by Jack, and now I'm asking the same questions. Why I entered the hangout? Could you specify?
Sure. You finding the dead body of Jesus Christ.
Why would that show?
Why would that do it? What would that do? How would that be outside of God's omnipotence?
I answered. Well, you said the Christian God, not his omnipotence. Now, the big
Wait,
hanging
why
point
would that
here
show
is
that
shut
it
up,
was
Jack.
false?
I'm talking. I'm responding
Why
to
would that
Ozzy.
show that
Shut
was
your
false?
mouth. Shut your mouth. Shut your
How would
fat
that show
trap,
it was
Jack.
false?
Shut your fat trap.
Could the person who's in charge of shutting people up be the moderator instead of you, Darwin's?
MK is well aware that this guy is a mentally ill stalker, Ozzy, and I know I understand you're not aware of it.
Darwin's, we're done. You're determined not to answer the question, and there's
no.
I'm
more than willing.
Guys. Yeah, I'll moderate. Let me step in. Let me just step in here. Okay. I muted you, Darwin's, because it was getting off course.
No, I understand. Well, this is what happens when the stalkers come in the room. Okay.
We're just trying to get an answer to the question. We haven't been
and
able
what
to
you've
get
got
an
going on
answer.
right here, MK, is he's pretending to be normal. Okay, he's not normal. He has been identified on Pal Talk by his fellow atheists as being mentally ill. He has been chastised repeatedly for having an obsessive heart and obsessive stalking. It is well known on Pal Talk that he is a stalker of mine. And now what he's doing is he's playing cool, calm, and collective and not pulling his normal sense. MK.
Good. Well, I guess we all can't be perfectly mentally healthy and perfectly normal.
Christian God can be falsified, and if we found the dead body of Christ, that would actually show that the Christian God didn't exist. Right? Now, I'm not seeing how if we found the dead body of Christ, that would show how the Christian God doesn't exist. He hasn't explained that. But if it's the case that it would show that the Christian God didn't exist, then I don't understand why he would make an argument that things can't be falsified, if he thinks, in fact, the Christian God can't be falsified. Now, even if it were the case that he does think things can be falsified, and he does think that it's possible for there to be evidence for the Christian God by virtue of the fact that it's falsifiable, right? He hasn't actually explained to us what would count as evidence for the existence of God, right? So we're just completely at a loss here, Darwin, to understand your position. On the one hand, you seem to be arguing that the Duhem-Quine thesis shows that things can't be falsified, and then you're saying that the dead body of Christ would falsify the Christian God. So what is your position? It just seems to be a mess.